The Duke of Harwell just made the biggest mistake of his life, and he doesn't even know it yet. 30 seconds ago, he evaluated Philippa Vane like livestock at market. Checked her teeth, metaphorically speaking. Ran the numbers on her dowry, her bloodline, her suitability. Decided she'd do. She smiled, nodded politely, then walked straight out of his study and bought the estate next door. Not to win him back. To make damn sure he sees her every single morning when he looks out his window and remembers exactly what he threw away. This is the story of two brilliant, stubborn people who turned a rejected marriage proposal into a war neither could win and both refused to lose. It's about pride, power, and what happens when you dismiss someone who refuses to be dismissed. Stay with me until the end. This gets wild. Drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. You're going to want to see how this ends. Now, let's rewind to the moment it all began. The letter arrived on a Thursday. Philippa Vane held it between two fingers like it might contaminate her if she gripped it properly. Heavy stock. Wax seal. The kind of correspondence that announced its own importance before you even cracked it open. Her solicitor, Mr. Dennison, had forwarded it from London with a note that read only, "Interesting development, advise caution." She broke the seal. "Miss Vane, His Grace the Duke of Harwell requests the honor of your presence at Thornfield Hall to discuss a matter of mutual benefit. Thursday next, 3 o'clock. A response is expected. No signature. Just the ducal crest stamped at the bottom like a brand." Philippa set the letter on her desk and stared at it for a full minute. Then she laughed. Once, sharp, humorless. "Mutual benefit," she said aloud to the empty room. "That's a new way to phrase, 'I need your money.'" "Oh, this is Mare Osakis." She'd heard of the Duke, of course. Everyone in Kent had. Thornfield Hall was one of the largest estates in the county. Old money so entrenched it had moss on it. The current Duke had inherited young after his father's death, 23, and if the gossip was accurate, and had spent the last decade running the estate with the kind of grim efficiency that made people respect him and avoid him in equal measure. He was also, according to her sources, nearly bankrupt. Not publicly, the facade was immaculate, but Philippa had made it her business to know these things. The Harwell mines had been failing for years. Bad investments in railroad stock. A string of poor harvests. The Duke had been shoring up the walls with his own hands, but the foundation was cracked, and now he wanted to discuss mutual benefit with the daughter of a coal magnate. Philippa's father had died 2 years ago and left her everything. A fortune so large it made old money aristocrats choke on their breakfast kippers. No brothers to inherit, no male cousins to contest the will. Just Philippa, 26 years old, sharp as cut glass, sitting on enough capital to buy and sell half the county. She knew exactly what this meeting was. A marriage negotiation. The Duke needed money. She had money. He had a title and a bloodline that went back to the conquest. She had new money, the kind that still smelled like coal dust no matter how many times you washed your hands. It was a transaction, clean, straightforward. She should have burned the letter. Instead, she wrote back and accepted the invitation. Thornfield Hall looked exactly like what it was. Power calcified into stone. Philippa's carriage rolled up the long gravel drive on Thursday at precisely 3 o'clock. The house loomed ahead, gray stone, severe lines, windows like cold eyes. No warmth, no welcome, just presence. The butler met her at the door. Old, stiff-backed, the kind of servant who'd been with the family so long, he probably remembered when the Duke was in short pants. "Miss Vane," he said, voice like dried paper, "His Grace is expecting you." She followed him through halls lined with portraits of dead Harwells, all of them staring down with the same expression, vague disapproval. The house smelled like old wood and older money. Everything was immaculate. Everything was cold. They stopped at a heavy oak door. The butler knocked once, waited for a muffled response, then opened it. "Miss Vane, Your Grace." Philippa stepped inside. The study was all dark wood and leather, bookshelves floor to ceiling, a massive desk positioned to catch the light from the tall windows. And behind the desk, rising as she entered, the Duke of Harwell. He was younger than she'd expected. 33, maybe 34. Tall, lean, dark hair starting to silver at the temples. Handsome in the way a blade is handsome, all hard edges and precision. His eyes were gray, assessing. He looked at her the way her father used to look at a new coal seam, calculating yield. Miss Vane! He inclined his head, polite, controlled. Thank you for coming. Your Grace. She matched his tone exactly, gave nothing. Please, sit. She sat, arranged her skirts, folded her hands, met his gaze and waited. The Duke settled back into his chair. For a moment, he said nothing, just studied her, taking inventory. Then, I'll be direct. I'm sure you know why I've asked you here. No, awesome skimmish. I have a suspicion, Philippa said. I need capital. Blunt. No preamble. You have it. I have a title, an estate, and a name that carries weight in this county and beyond. A marriage between us would be advantageous to both parties. Advantageous. Such a bloodless word. Go on, Philippa said. He leaned forward slightly. The terms would be fair. You'd become the Duchess of Harwell. Full social standing, access to the highest circles. Your children would be legitimate heirs to the dukedom. In return, your capital would be used to restore Thornfield and the Harwell holdings to full solvency. My capital, Philippa repeated. Not our capital. Something flickered in his eyes. A technicality of phrasing. Is it? He paused, recalculated. Upon marriage, your assets would of course become jointly held, but the management of the estate and investments would remain under my direction. I have experience in these matters, and I don't. You're a woman of intelligence, Miss Vane, but intelligence and experience are not the same thing. Philippa smiled. It didn't reach her eyes. How much do you need? He blinked. Hadn't expected her to ask outright. 80,000 pounds, he said. Initially. More over time as improvements are made. 80,000. She had 3 times that in liquid assets alone. And what would I receive in return? She asked. Beyond the title. Security, position, respect. I already have security. I can buy position. And respect. She tilted her head. Respect isn't something you can grant me, Your Grace. It's something I earn. His jaw tightened, just slightly. This is a generous offer. It's a business proposal. Marriage is a business arrangement. For you, perhaps. Silence dropped between them like a stone. The Duke sat back, reassessed. She could see him doing it, running new calculations, adjusting his approach. You're more practical than I anticipated, he said carefully. You mean I'm less desperate? I mean you understand the realities of our situation. Our situation? Philippa rose from her chair, smoothly, unhurried. Your Grace, I don't have a situation. You do. You need my money to save your estate. I don't need your title to validate my existence. He stood as well. Automatic. Ingrained manners. Then why did you come? Curiosity. She picked up her gloves from the arm of the chair, pulled them on one finger at a time. I wanted to see if the Duke of Harwell was as arrogant as people said. His face went very still. And your conclusion? The rumors undersold it. For a heartbeat, she thought he might actually lose his composure. His hands flexed once at his sides. His eyes went flat and hard. But when he spoke, his voice was perfectly even. I see I've misjudged the situation. My apologies for wasting your time, Miss Vane. No apology necessary, Your Grace. It was an education. She turned toward the door. Miss Vane. She paused, didn't look back. I made you a fair offer, he said. You do well to remember that there aren't many men in this county who would make you any offer at all. Now she turned, slowly. You're absolutely right, she said. There aren't many men in this county who would dare. She walked out. Behind her, she heard something hit the desk, hard, like a fist. She smiled all the way to her carriage. The problem with rejecting a duke, Philippa discovered over the next 3 weeks, was that dukes had long memories and short tempers. The whispers started immediately. Did you hear? Miss Vane turned down Harwell. Turned him down? After he lowered himself to even make the offer? New money. They don't understand how these things work. Someone should tell her she won't get another chance like that. Philippa ignored them. She had practice ignoring things that didn't matter. What did matter was the letter waiting for her when she returned from a particularly tedious dinner party at the Ashfords. Mr. Dennison's handwriting. Express post. Miss Vane, the Whitmore Park estate has come available. Immediate sale. The owner's debts have caught up with him. 700 acres, manor house, tenant farms. Borders Thornfield to the east. It's a risk. The land is poor, the house needs work, and you'd be taking on management of farms that have been failing for years. But the price is fair, more than fair actually, given the circumstances. If you're interested, I can secure it within the week. The Duke of Harwell has also expressed interest, but his capital situation makes a quick purchase unlikely. Your decision. Philippa read the letter 3 times. Then she picked up her pen. Mr. Dennison, buy it immediately. Offer asking price plus 10% if it ensures the sale closes before the Duke can counter. And send me every survey, deed, and property record for Whitmore Park and the eastern border of Thornfield. I want to know exactly where my land ends and his begins. P. Vane. She sealed the letter and sent it express that night. By Monday morning, Whitmore Park was hers. By Monday afternoon, the entire county knew. By Tuesday, she received a second letter from the Duke of Harwell. She didn't open it, just held it up to the light from her study window at Whitmore Park, her study, in her house, on her land, and smiled. Then she tossed it in the fire. Fake. Whitmore Park was a disaster. Philippa walked the property 3 days after taking possession and cataloged the damage with the same clinical precision her father had taught her. The manor house, structurally sound but aesthetically grim. Water damage in the east wing. Roof needed replacing. Half the windows didn't close properly. The previous owner had clearly stopped caring years ago. The land, 700 acres of exhausted soil and neglected fields. The tenant farmers looked at her like she was a ghost when she introduced herself. Nervous, suspicious, already planning their exit strategies. The boundaries. Now that was interesting. She stood at the eastern edge of her property with the survey map in one hand and a sight line to Thornfield's western fields in the other. The border ran along a low stone wall, crumbling in places, clear in others, and right there, where the wall jogged south near the old oak. That's not right, she murmured. Her land surveyor, a taciturn man named Peters, came to stand beside her, squinted at the map, looked at the ground, looked at the map again. The wall's off, he said. By how much? 20 feet, maybe 30. Hard to say without a proper survey, but the deed says your property line follows the old parish boundary. The wall doesn't. Philippa folded the map. How long has the wall been there? 100 years, give or take, maybe longer. And the actual boundary? Peters pointed. Runs through that oak, cuts through His Grace's barley field about 30 yards in. Philippa looked at the field in question. Neat rows. Well-maintained. Clearly productive land. Land that, according to the deed, was legally hers. Well, she said, this should be interesting. What? She sent the Duke a letter that evening. Polite, professional, a courtesy, really. Your Grace, upon surveying the Whitmore Park property, I've discovered a discrepancy in the eastern boundary. According to the original deed and parish records, the border runs 30 yards into what is currently being farmed as Thornfield land. I'm writing to inform you of this error and to request a formal survey to establish the correct boundary. I'm sure this can be resolved amicably. P. Vane. His response arrived the next morning. Miss Vane, the wall has stood for over a century. Possession is 9/10 of the law. I suggest you focus on managing your own failing farms, rather than inventing disputes where none exist. Harwell Philippa read the letter twice. Then she called for her horse, Mant. She rode to Thornfield alone. The butler tried to turn her away at the door, but Philippa had not spent 2 years managing her father's business interests by accepting no from servants. Tell His Grace that Miss Vane is here regarding the boundary dispute. If he refuses to see me, I'll be filing a formal claim with the county court by end of business today. The butler's face went very carefully blank. One moment, miss. He returned 3 minutes later and led her once again to the Duke's study. The Duke was standing this time, arms crossed, expression carved from ice. Miss Vane, Your Grace, you have 5 minutes. I only need 2. She pulled the survey documents from her bag and spread them on his desk. The original deed, the parish boundary record from 1754, the survey I had commissioned yesterday. All of them confirm the same thing. The wall is incorrectly placed. 30 yards of what you're farming as Thornfield land is legally mine. He didn't look at the documents. Trustees just kept his eyes on her. That land has been farmed by Thornfield for generations. That doesn't make it yours. It makes it mine by right of adverse possession, continuous, uncontested use for over 100 years. Philippa smiled. Uncontested? That's the key word, isn't it? I'm contesting it now. You bought Whitmore Park 3 weeks ago. You have no historical claim. I have the deed, I have the records, I have the law. She tapped the documents. You can review these, hire your own surveyor, and we can resolve this professionally. Or you can stonewall me, and I'll take it to court. Either way, Your Grace, that land is mine. Something dangerous flickered in his eyes. You're doing this because I withdrew my offer. I'm doing this because you're farming my land. I'm farming land my family has held for over a century, and you're using a technicality to enforce my legal property rights? Yes. She gathered the documents, slid them back into her bag. I'm not interested in petty revenge, Your Grace. I'm interested in what's mine. If you want to dispute the boundary, hire a surveyor and prove me wrong. But do it quickly. Planting season's coming, and I'd hate for you to waste resources on a field you'll have to vacate. She turned to leave. 80 yards, he said. She stopped. The wall's off by 80 yards in the southern section, he continued. You conveniently left that out. Philippa turned back slowly. I beg your pardon? He moved to the window, looked out across his fields. If we're going to have a legal survey done, Miss Vane, let's do it properly. The wall jogs at the old oak, yes, but it jogs again near the southern stream. By my estimation, that puts 80 yards of your land on my side of the boundary. Bab. Basmoki pounce. He was right. She'd checked that section too. Then we're both encroaching, she said. So it would seem. They stared at each other. Mutual adjustment, Philippa said finally. We both pull back to the legal line. Clean separation. I lose 30 yards of productive barley field, and I lose 80 yards of grazing land. You come out ahead. He turned from the window. Or we could leave the wall as it stands, acknowledge the historical boundary and avoid the cost and spectacle of a legal battle. Acknowledge your illegal claim. You mean, acknowledge a practical reality. And set a precedent that you can take whatever you want as long as you've held it long enough? Philippa shook her head. No, Your Grace. The law is the law. Goa basamaki. The law, he said, voice dropping, is a weapon you're wielding because I had the temerity to treat you like a rational adult instead of a blushing debutante. You treated me like a balance sheet, and you're treating this boundary dispute like a personal vendetta. I'm treating it like what it is, a property rights issue. If you can't separate your bruised ego from basic land law, that's your problem, not mine. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. The Duke crossed to his desk, braced his hands on it, leaned forward. You want a war, Miss Vane? Is that it? You want to see if new money can beat old blood? I don't want a war, Your Grace. I want what's legally mine. If that feels like a war to you, perhaps you should examine why you're so accustomed to taking things that don't belong to you. His knuckles went white against the desk. For 3 long seconds, neither of them moved. Then he straightened, smoothed his waistcoat. When he spoke again, his voice was perfectly level, perfectly cold. Hire your surveyor. I'll hire mine. We'll meet with both, review the findings, and settle this according to law. But make no mistake, Miss Vane, this isn't over. I never thought it was. She walked out for the second time. This time, she didn't smile. The dual survey took 2 weeks and cost Philippa £300. It was worth every penny. Both surveyors, hers and the Duke's, confirmed the same results. The wall was incorrectly placed. Philippa's land extended 30 yards into the Duke's barley field. The Duke's land extended 80 yards into her grazing pasture. They met at the boundary on a cold morning in early March to review the findings. The Duke arrived on horseback with his estate manager and surveyor. Philippa arrived on foot with Peters and her solicitor. They faced each other across the disputed barley field like generals negotiating a ceasefire. "The findings are clear," Mr. Dennison said, holding up the survey report. "Both parties are in violation of the legal boundary. The solution is equally clear. Both parties pull back to the established line." The Duke's estate manager, a grizzled man named Cornwall, shook his head. "That barley field has been Thornfield land since before your client was born. You're asking us to surrender productive farmland based on a technicality." "It's not a technicality," Philippa said. "It's the deed." "It's 30 yards, Cornwall shot back. 30 yards that won't make a damn bit of difference to Whitmore's bottom line, but will cost us a full harvest." "And 80 yards of grazing land won't make a difference to mine? Your logic is inconsistent, Mr. Cornwall." The Duke, who had been silent until now, raised one hand. Cornwall stopped talking immediately. "Miss Vane," the Duke said, "a proposal." "I'm listening." "We split the difference. I'll pull back from the 30 yards in the north. You pull back from 40 yards in the south. The remaining 40 you can keep. Both parties compromise. Both parties save face. Philippa considered. "You keep productive farmland. I lose productive grazing land. How is that equitable? You lose less than you would under a full legal adjustment. And you avoid the cost and time of litigation. Litigation you'd lose, perhaps, but it would take 2 years and cost both of us considerably more than 40 yards of grass." He had a point. "Damn him!" Philippa looked at Peters. "Value assessment?" Peters pulled out his notebook, flipped through. 40 yards of that grazing land is worth about 60 pounds annual revenue. The 30 yards of barley field he's giving up is worth about 90. You'd still come out behind. "Then 70-30, Philippa said, turning back to the Duke. "I pull back 70 yards. You pull back 30. I lose some grazing land, you lose your encroachment. Net effect, closer to equal." The Duke's jaw tightened. "That's not a compromise. That's a concession." "It's mathematics. 30 yards of your land is worth more than 30 yards of mine. If we're both sacrificing equal value, the acreage can't be equal." "You're negotiating crop yields now?" "I'm negotiating fair value. That's how business works." He stared at her. She stared back. Then, impossibly, he almost smiled. Not warmth, just recognition. 60-40, he said. "You pull back 60. I pull back 30. Final offer." Philippa ran the numbers in her head. 60 yards of grazing land versus 30 yards of barley field. Still not perfectly equal, but closer. And it ended this without litigation. "Done," she said. "On one condition." Of course there's a condition. The new boundary gets marked with stone markers, surveyed, recorded, no ambiguity, no one farms across that line again. Shikisel. The Duke glanced at Cornwall, who looked like he'd swallowed something bitter, but nodded. "Agreed," the Duke said. They shook hands. His grip was firm, cool, impersonal. "Pleasure doing business, Your Grace," Philippa said. "I'm sure it was," he replied. She turned to leave, then paused, looked back. "Your Grace? Miss Vane. That barley field you're keeping, what are you planning next season?" His eyes narrowed slightly, suspicious. "Why?" "Because the soil analysis I had done on my side of the boundary showed nitrogen depletion. If your field's been farmed as intensively as mine, you'll want to rotate in legumes, clover, maybe vetch. Give the soil a year to recover." She could see him processing that, deciding whether she was being helpful or condescending. "I'll take that under advisement," he said finally. "You should, unless you enjoy diminishing returns." She walked away before he could respond. Behind her, she heard Cornwall mutter something, then the Duke's voice, low and clipped. Not another word. Philippa allowed herself a small smile. The war wasn't over, but she'd won the first battle. The boundary markers went up the first week of April. Philippa stood in the morning cold and watched the stonemasons set the final marker into place. a squared granite post with Whitmore Park carved on one side and the survey coordinates on the other. Clean. Permanent. Hers. Peters handed her the final survey document. That's the last of them, miss. 12 markers total along the eastern boundary, all recorded with the county clerk as of yesterday. Bais Mishit. Good. She signed the document, handed it back. Make sure Thornfield receives a copy. Already sent, miss. Of course it was. Peters was thorough. It's why she paid him well. She should have felt satisfied, victorious even. She'd taken on a duke and won, established her rights, proven she wouldn't be dismissed or intimidated. Instead, she felt restless. Whitmore Park sprawled around her in various states of disrepair. The fields needed work. The tenant farmers needed guidance. The manor house needed a new roof, new windows, new everything. She had 100 problems to solve and limited time to solve them before the planning season slipped away entirely. And yet here she was, staring at a granite marker on the border of a man's land, wondering what he thought when he saw it. Miss Vane? Oh, us, bands. She turned. One of the tenant farmers, Miller his name was, stood a few yards away, cap in hand, looking uncertain. Yes? Begging your pardon, miss, but we need to talk about the spring planting. The seed stock's mostly ruined from poor storage, and the equipment— He gestured vaguely toward the barn. Well, it needs more than repair, if you take my meaning. Philippa tucked the restless feeling away and focused. This was what mattered. The land. The work. Not some pointless fixation on a neighbor who'd made it clear he wanted nothing to do with her. Show me, she said. Miller led her to the largest barn on the property. Inside, the situation was worse than she'd anticipated. Half the plows were broken or rusted beyond use. The seed stock had been stored in damp conditions. Most of it was moldy or sprouting prematurely. The whole operation had the air of something abandoned mid-stride. How much would it cost to replace all of this? She asked. Miller scratched his jaw. For all 6 farms? 300 pounds, maybe more. And that's just equipment and seed. The soil itself is exhausted, miss. We'd need fertilizer, rotation planning, maybe let some fields lie fallow, which we can't afford to do in year 1. No, miss. Philippa walked the length of the barn, calculating. 300 pounds for equipment and seed. Another 100 for fertilizer. Labor costs. Repairs to the tenant cottages, which she'd seen and were barely habitable. The roof on the manor house alone was going to run 400 pounds. She had the money. That wasn't the problem. The problem was that every pound she spent here was a pound she couldn't spend elsewhere. And Whitmore Park was a sinkhole. All right, she said. Make me a list. Everything we need, prioritized. We'll start with the most critical items and work down. Miller nodded, relieved. Yes, miss. Thank you, miss. She left him to his inventory and walked back toward the house, mind churning through numbers and logistics. She didn't see the Duke until she nearly walked into him. He was standing at the edge of her drive, still mounted, clearly having just ridden over from Thornfield. His horse, a massive black gelding, shifted beneath him, impatient. Philippa stopped. Your Grace. Miss Vane. He dismounted in one fluid motion, handed the reins to his groom. I was hoping to catch you. You've caught me. What can I do for you? He pulled an envelope from his coat. I received your survey document. As required by law, Sam. Yes, all very official. He handed her the envelope. That's my formal acknowledgement of the new boundary. Signed, witnessed, filed with my solicitor. She took it, flipped it open, scanned the contents. Everything appeared in order. Thank you, she said, tucking it into her own coat pocket. I appreciate your cooperation. It wasn't cooperation. It was accepting reality. He glanced past her toward the barn, where Miller was visible through the open doors, still taking inventory. How are your farms? The question caught her off guard. Why do you ask? Because Whitmore's been failing for years, and you've had it for less than a month. I'm curious whether you've realized what you've purchased. There was no mockery in his tone, just interest, genuine interest. I know exactly what I've purchased, Philippa said. A challenge, a polite word for disaster. That too. He almost smiled. Almost. The previous owner ran this estate into the ground through sheer incompetence. The soil is exhausted, the equipment is ruined, and the tenant farmers have been operating without proper oversight for years. You're looking at 2 full seasons minimum before you see any return on investment. I'm aware. Are you? He took a step closer. Not threatening, just direct. Because I've been managing Thornfield since I was 23, Miss Vane, and I can tell you from experience that good intentions and capital only take you so far. Land like this requires knowledge, strategy. You can't just throw money at it and hope it recovers. Something hot and sharp flared in Philippa's chest. Is there a point to this lecture, Your Grace, or are you simply enjoying the sound of your own expertise? The point, he said, voice level, is that if you mismanage Whitmore, it affects me. Failed farms drive down property values. Desperate tenants poach resources. Your disaster becomes my problem. How considerate of you to be concerned. I'm not being considerate, I'm being practical. And what would you suggest I do? Sell it back to you at a loss? Admit I'm in over my head and beg for your guidance? I'd suggest you hire a competent estate manager before you bankrupt yourself trying to learn through trial and error. Philippa laughed, cold, sharp. I hired Peters. He's competent. Peters is a surveyor, not a farmer. You need someone who understands crop rotation, soil management, tenant relations. I understand those things perfectly well, Your Grace. Do you? He crossed his arms. Tell me then, what are you planting in your northern fields? That depends on the soil analysis, which showed nitrogen depletion. So what are you planting? She met his gaze, refused to blink. Legumes, clover or vetch, a rotation crop to restore the soil. He paused, reassessed. You did your research. I always do my research. And your southern fields, the ones near the stream? Root vegetables. The soil there retains more moisture. Equipment? Needs replacing. I'm prioritizing based on immediate need. Tenant housing? Repairs scheduled for next month. He stared at her. She stared back. Then he shook his head. You've thought this through. Of course I have. Did you think I bought Whitmore Park on a whim? Honestly, yes. Because I'm a woman or because I'm new money? Because you bought an estate bordering mine immediately after I withdrew a marriage proposal. It looked like spite. It was strategy. Was it? He stepped closer again, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. Because from where I'm standing, Miss Vane, it looks like you're trying to prove something. To me, to the county, maybe to yourself. And from where I'm standing, Your Grace, it looks like you're uncomfortable with the idea of a neighbor you can't control. His jaw tightened. I don't need to control you. Good, because you can't. They stood there, locked in silent combat, neither willing to retreat. Finally, the Duke stepped back, exhaled. I didn't come here to argue. Could have fooled me. I came to offer advice, freely given, no strings. How magnanimous. Take it or leave it, Miss Vane, but here it is. You're going to fail if you try to do this alone. Hire an estate manager, someone local who knows the land and the tenants. It'll cost you, but less than the alternative. I'll take that under advisement. Will you? Or will you ignore it because it came from me? She smiled, thin, sharp. I'll ignore it because I don't take advice from men who assume I need it. He mounted his horse in one swift motion, looked down at her from that elevated position, literally and figuratively. Your pride is going to ruin you, he said. Better than your condescension ruining me. He turned the horse, paused. For what it's worth, Miss Vane, I hope you succeed. Genuinely. Because if you don't, it affects both of us. He rode off before she could respond. Philippa stood in her drive, watching him disappear down the road, fists clenched at her sides. Then she turned and walked back into her house, straight to her study, and pulled out her ledger. 300 pounds for equipment and seed, 100 for fertilizer, 400 for the roof, another 200 for tenant housing repairs. Miscellaneous costs, say, another 100. 1,100 pounds, minimum. She had it, barely. But spending it all on Whitmore meant no safety margin, no reserves if something went wrong. And something always went wrong. She stared at the numbers until they blurred. Then she made a decision. She was going to hire an estate manager. Not because the Duke told her to, but because he was right, damn him. and she was smart enough to recognize good advice even when it came from an insufferable source. But she wasn't going to hire just anyone. She was going to hire the best. Finding the best turned out to be harder than anticipated. Philippa spent 2 weeks interviewing candidates. Men, mostly. Middle-aged, experienced, full of credentials and references. They all said the right things, talked about crop yields and tenant management and long-term sustainability, and they all looked at her like she was play acting. "Of course, Miss Vane," one of them said, "you'll want to defer to my judgment on most operational matters. Estate management is complex, and I wouldn't want to burden you with the details." She showed him out immediately. Another one actually asked if she planned to marry soon because continuity of management is important, and a husband would naturally assume oversight. She didn't bother showing him out, just told him to leave. By the end of the second week, she was ready to manage the damn estate herself, out of sheer spite. Then Peters knocked on her study door. "Miss Vane, there's someone here to see you." Wasn't on the schedule, but she says it's about the estate manager position. "She?" "Yes, miss. A Mrs. Halloway. Says she managed the Brennan estate over in Sussex for 15 years. Philippa closed her ledger. "Send her in." Mrs. Halloway was 50-something, gray-haired, broad-shouldered, and had the kind of face that suggested she'd seen everything and been unimpressed by most of it. She walked into Philippa's study like she owned it, set a worn leather portfolio on the desk, and sat down without being invited. "Mrs. Halloway," Philippa said carefully, "you managed the Brennan estate, for 15 years. Took it from near bankruptcy to profitability in 3. Increased crop yields by 40%, reduced tenant turnover to almost nothing, and left it in better condition than I found it." She opened the portfolio, pulled out a stack of documents. References, financial records, yield reports, all verified. The Philippa scanned the documents. Everything checked out. Better than checked out. The numbers were exceptional. "Why did you leave?" Lord Brennan died. His son inherited and decided he didn't need a woman telling him how to run his estate. Fired me, hired his university friend instead. The estate's been declining ever since. Mrs. Halloway's expression didn't change, just stated facts. "I'm expensive, Miss Vane. I'm opinionated. I don't take orders I know are wrong, and I don't suffer fools. If you want someone who'll nod and smile and defer to your every whim, hire one of the idiots you've been interviewing. Bob, C.K. Mas." Philippa blinked. "How did you know I've been interviewing?" "Because word travels, and you've been seeing every mediocre estate manager in the county. None of them will work for you long term. They'll either try to control you or wait for you to fail. I, on the other hand, don't care that you're a woman. I care that you have the capital and the will to fix this place. Question is, do you have the sense to let me help you do it?" For the first time in weeks, Philippa smiled, actually smiled. "What's your fee?" £200 annual salary, plus 5% of net profit once the estate turns profitable. And I want full operational authority. You set the strategy, I execute it. You don't second-guess me in front of the tenants, and I don't spend your money without approval. We work as partners, or we don't work at all." It was more than Philippa had budgeted. The profit-sharing clause was aggressive. It was also exactly what she needed. "When can you start?" Mrs. Halloway stood, extended her hand. "Tomorrow." They shook on it. Mrs. Halloway started by firing 3 of the tenant farmers. "They're stealing from you," she said bluntly when Philippa questioned the decision. "Seed, equipment, probably selling your hay on the side. I've seen it a dozen times. They think you're a soft target because you're young and female. Get rid of them now, or they'll poison the rest." Philippa trusted her judgment. The 3 farmers were gone by end of week, replaced with families Mrs. Halloway personally vouched for. The remaining tenants fell in line fast. Within a month, Whitmore Park began to show signs of life. The fields were plowed and planted properly. The equipment was repaired or replaced. The tenant cottages got new roofs and functional doors. Mrs. Halloway ran the operation with ruthless efficiency, and Philippa, freed from day-to-day management, could focus on the larger strategy. It was working, and that apparently was a problem for some people. The whispers started in May. Did you hear? Miss Vane hired a woman to manage her estate. A woman? Managing farms? What does she know about farming? More than Miss Vane, apparently. Well, what can you expect from new money? No sense of propriety. Philippa heard the rumors and ignored them. She had work to do. But the rumors didn't stay rumors. They escalated. It started with subtle slights. Invitations that didn't arrive. Social calls that dried up. The local gentry, already suspicious of her, closed ranks. Then it got worse. She was at the county assembly in early June when Lady Marchmont approached her. Lady Marchmont was old money, old blood, and old prejudices wrapped in expensive silk. She ruled the local social hierarchy with the same iron grip her ancestors had used to rule their estates. "Miss Vane," she said, voice dripping false sweetness, "how lovely to see you. We've all been so curious about your little project at Whitmore Park." "It's progressing well, thank you, Lady Marchmont." "Oh, I'm sure it is. Though I must say, hiring a woman to manage the estate, quite unconventional." She paused delicately. "Some might say inappropriate." Philippa kept her expression neutral. "Mrs. Halloway is the most qualified candidate I interviewed. Her results speak for themselves." "What will that see says?" "Her results." Lady Marchmont's smile sharpened. "My dear, results are one thing. Propriety is another. A woman of your position should be setting an example, not indulging in these progressive notions. I wasn't aware that competence was a progressive notion. Competence in one's proper sphere, certainly. But a woman managing farms, directing men, it's unseemly, and frankly, it reflects poorly on all of us." Several other women had drifted closer, listening. Philippa could feel their eyes on her, judging, waiting to see if she'd fold. "I appreciate your concern, Lady Marchmont," Philippa said carefully, "but my business decisions are mine to make." "Of course they are, dear, though one does wonder." Lady Marchmont dropped her voice to a stage whisper. "If perhaps the rumors are true." "That you're simply trying to provoke a certain neighbor. The Duke of Harwell, perhaps?" The room seemed to still. Philippa's spine went rigid. "I beg your pardon?" "Oh, come now. Everyone knows you bought Whitmore Park directly after His Grace withdrew his very generous offer. And now you're running the estate in the most unconventional manner possible, directly adjacent to his land. It does seem rather pointed." "My estate management has nothing to do with the Duke." "Doesn't it?" Lady Marchmont's eyes glittered. "You're making quite the spectacle, Miss Vane. Boundary disputes. Female estate managers. One can't help but think you're trying to make a point, though I'm not sure it's the point you think you're making." Philippa's hands clenched. She forced them to relax. "And what point would that be, Lady Marchmont?" "That new money, no matter how much of it there is, cannot buy breeding or sense." Lady Marchmont smiled. "But I'm sure you'll learn that in time." She drifted away, leaving Philippa standing alone in the middle of the assembly room, acutely aware of every eye on her. She lasted another 20 minutes before making her excuses and leaving. The ride back to Whitmore Park felt longer than usual. When she finally reached her study, she sat at her desk and stared at the wall, fury and humiliation churning in her chest. She'd known there would be resistance, expected it even. But being publicly humiliated, having her competence, her decisions, her entire existence questioned in front of the county's elite. A knock at the door. "Come in," she said, not bothering to hide the edge in her voice. Mrs. Halloway entered, took one look at Philippa's face, and closed the door behind her. "What happened?" "Lady Marchmont happened." "Us." Mrs. Halloway sat down, uninvited. "What did the old vulture say?" Philippa relayed the conversation. All of it. By the end, her hands were shaking. Mrs. Halloway listened in silence. Then, "She's trying to isolate you." "I know." "She's also wrong. About everything. That doesn't matter if everyone believes her." "Then make them believe something else." Mrs. Halloway leaned forward. "You've been playing by their rules, Miss Vane. Trying to fit in, prove yourself on their terms. Stop. You're never going to win that game." "So what do I do?" "You change the game." Mrs. Halloway's smile was sharp. "You throw a party, a big one. Invite everyone. Show them exactly what Whitmore Park has become under your management. Make it impossible to dismiss you. Philippa stared at her. A party. A garden party. Mid-July, when the first crops are coming in. Show off the estate. Prove you're not some frivolous girl playing at land ownership. Prove you're a landowner, period. It was bold, possibly reckless. It was also exactly right. Do it, Philippa said. Mrs. Halloway grinned. Already started the guest list. Yeah. The invitations went out the next week. The responses came back mixed. Some acceptances. Several polite declinations. A few that didn't respond at all, but enough acceptances to make it work. Philippa threw herself into preparations. The gardens were cleaned and manicured. The house was repaired and polished until it gleamed. The tenant farms were put on display, fields lush with crops, equipment in working order, cottages freshly painted. She was going to show them, all of them. 2 days before the party, a writer arrived from Thornfield. The Duke's formal response to her invitation. Philippa opened it, half expecting a rejection. Instead, Miss Vane, I accept your invitation for July 17th. I look forward to seeing what you've accomplished. Harwell. She read it 3 times, then she set it on her desk and allowed herself a small, fierce smile. Let him come. Let them all come. She'd show them exactly what she was capable of. The morning of July 17th dawned clear and bright. By noon, the first guests were arriving. Philippa stood at the entrance to Whitmore Park in a dress that had cost more than most people's annual income. Deep green silk, tailored perfectly, a statement in fabric form, and greeted each arrival with cool professionalism. Lady Marchmont arrived fashionably late, swept up the drive like she owned it, and offered Philippa a smile that could cut glass. Miss Vane, how quaint. You've done wonders with the place. Thank you, Lady Marchmont. Please, enjoy the gardens. The Duke arrived last. He dismounted, handed his reins to the groom, and walked toward her with that same controlled grace he always carried. Miss Vane, Your Grace. His eyes traveled over the estate, the manicured grounds, the repaired buildings, the fields visible in the distance. She watched him take it all in, assess it. You've been busy, he said finally. I told you I knew what I was doing. So you did. He looked at her directly. I'm impressed. Don't be. I'm not finished yet. Something flickered in his expression. Respect, maybe, or challenge. No, he said quietly. I don't imagine you are. He walked past her into the party, leaving her standing there with her heart hammering against her ribs for reasons she absolutely refused to examine. The party went perfectly. The guests toured the grounds, admired the improvements, complimented the refreshments. Philippa played the gracious hostess, accepted compliments with practiced humility, and watched as opinion began to shift. She'd done it, proven herself. And then Lady Marchmont opened her mouth. It happened near the end of the afternoon. Most of the guests had gathered near the main lawn for refreshments. Philippa was speaking with the vicar's wife when Lady Marchmont's voice cut across the conversation. Of course, we're all very impressed with what Miss Vane has accomplished, though one does have to wonder how much of this is Miss Vane's work and how much is Mrs. Halloway's. The lawn went quiet. Philippa turned slowly. I beg your pardon? Lady Marchmont smiled. I'm simply observing, dear, that you've relied quite heavily on your estate manager, which is wise, certainly, given your inexperience. But it does raise the question of who's really running Whitmore Park. The challenge was clear, public, deliberate. Philippa felt every eye on her, felt the weight of the moment. She could deflect, make light of it, laugh it off, or she could meet it head on. She chose the second option. You're absolutely right, Lady Marchmont, she said clearly. I have relied on Mrs. Halloway because she's the best estate manager in the county, and I'm smart enough to hire the best. Just as I'm smart enough to know that running an estate isn't about doing every task yourself. It's about building a team, delegating effectively, and making strategic decisions, which I've done. Whitmore Park's success isn't despite my inexperience. It's because I had the sense to recognize what I didn't know and hire people who did. That's not weakness. That's leadership. The silence stretched. Then, from across the lawn, the Duke's voice, She's right. Every head turned. The Duke stepped forward, calm and deliberate. Miss Vane has done in 3 months what most landowners couldn't do in 3 years. She's turned a failing estate into a functioning operation through intelligence, capital investment, and strategic management. Questioning her competence at this point isn't just unfair. It's absurd. Lady Marchmont's face went very still. Your Grace, and frankly, Lady Marchmont, he continued, voice level but firm, your insinuations reflect more poorly on you than on Miss Vane. She's proven herself. Repeatedly. Perhaps it's time the rest of us acknowledged that. The lawn was dead silent. Philippa stared at him. He didn't look at her, just kept his eyes on Lady Marchmont, expression unreadable. Lady Marchmont's mouth opened, closed. She looked around at the other guests, saw no support there, and managed a thin smile. Of course, Your Grace. I meant no offense. I'm sure you didn't do, the Duke said, but his tone suggested otherwise. Lady Marchmont excused herself shortly after. Several other guests drifted away. But the ones who remained, the ones who mattered, stayed, talked with Philippa, asked questions about the estate, treated her for the first time like an equal. The party wound down as the sun began to set. Philippa saw off the last guests, thanked them for coming, and finally, blessedly, found herself alone. Except she wasn't. The Duke was standing near the garden gate, clearly waiting. She walked over slowly. Your Grace, Miss Vane. Thank you, she said, for what you said. He shook his head. I didn't say anything that wasn't true. You didn't have to say anything at all. Yes, I did. He looked at her directly. Lady Marchmont was out of line. Someone needed to say it. Why you? He was quiet for a moment, then, because I was wrong about you. When you walked out of my study, I thought you were being irrational, emotional. I thought you'd fail. And now? Now I think you're the most capable landowner in this county, including me. Philippa's breath caught. You don't mean that. I don't say things I don't mean, Miss Vane. He paused. I owe you an apology for how I treated you during that first meeting. You weren't a balance sheet. You were a person, and I failed to see that. She didn't know what to say, couldn't find words. Finally, apology accepted. He nodded, started to leave, stopped. Miss Vane? Yes? Don't let them make you doubt yourself. You're doing something remarkable here. Don't stop. Then he mounted his horse and rode away into the gathering dusk, leaving Philippa standing in her garden with her heart doing strange, complicated things in her chest. She'd won. But somehow, it felt like the game had just changed entirely. She'd won. But somehow, it felt like the game had just changed entirely. Philippa stood in her garden long after the Duke disappeared down the drive, watching the last traces of sunlight bleed from the sky. Her hands were still shaking, not from nerves, but from something else entirely. Something she didn't want to name. Mrs. Halloway found her there 20 minutes later. Well, the older woman said, that was quite the performance. Which part? All of it, but especially the part where the Duke of Harwell publicly defended you in front of half the county. Mrs. Halloway's eyes were sharp. That man doesn't do anything without calculation. Miss Vane, question is, what's he calculating? Philippa turned away from the drive. I have no idea. Don't you? He apologized, that's all. It doesn't mean anything. Mrs. Halloway snorted. If you believe that, you're not as smart as I thought you were. She walked back toward the house before Philippa could respond, leaving her alone with thoughts she absolutely did not want to examine. The next morning brought complications. Philippa was reviewing the harvest projections when Peters knocked. Miss Vane, there's a problem with the northern tenant farm, the Millers. She set down her pen. What kind of problem? Their youngest boy took sick 3 days ago. Fever, can't keep food down. Mrs. Miller sent word this morning. It's gotten worse. Philippa stood immediately. Have they called for a doctor? Can't afford one, miss. They were hoping, Peters shifted uncomfortably, hoping you might advance them the funds. They're good people, miss. Good workers. Just don't have the reserves. She grabbed her coat. I'll go myself. Send for Dr. Whitmore. Tell him to meet me at the Miller farm and that I'll cover his fee. Peters looked relieved. Yes, miss. Right away. The Miller farm sat at the northern edge of her property. A small cottage, modest fields, everything neat and well-maintained despite their obvious poverty. Mrs. Miller met Philippa at the door, face drawn with exhaustion and fear. Miss Vane, I'm so sorry to trouble you. We didn't know who else. Show me, Philippa said. The boy was 6, maybe 7. Small for his age, lying in a narrow bed in the corner of the main room, his skin flushed and hot to the touch. His breathing was shallow, rapid. His eyes were closed but moving beneath the lids. Philippa knelt beside the bed. How long has he been like this? 3 days, miss. Started with just a fever, but now he won't wake up properly, and the fever won't break. Mrs. Miller's voice cracked. My husband's out in the fields. We can't afford to lose the planting time, but I can't leave Thomas alone. You won't have to. Philippa stood. Dr. Whitmore is on his way. I'll stay until he arrives. Miss, we can't pay. I'm not asking you to pay. Your son is sick. We're getting him help. That's the end of it. Mrs. Miller's eyes filled with tears. She looked away quickly, embarrassed. Doctor. Whitmore arrived 30 minutes later, a practical man in his 50s who asked sharp questions and gave no false comfort. He examined the boy thoroughly, checked his pulse, his breathing, the heat of his skin. Scarlet fever, he said finally. Early stages, but progressing fast. Mrs. Miller went white. He'll need constant care, cool compresses to bring down the fever, liquids when he'll take them. Complete rest. Dr. Whitmore pulled a small bottle from his bag. This is willow bark tincture. 3 drops in water every 4 hours. It'll help with the fever. How long? Philippa asked. A week, maybe 2. If the fever breaks, he'll recover. If it doesn't, he didn't finish the sentence. Didn't need to. Philippa paid him on the spot, more than his usual fee, and sent him on his way with instructions to return in 2 days. Then she turned to Mrs. Miller. I'm sending someone from the house to help you. You need rest. I can't leave him. You're no good to him if you collapse. Someone will sit with Thomas while you sleep. That's not a suggestion, Mrs. Miller. The woman looked like she wanted to argue, but exhaustion won. She nodded. Philippa stayed another hour, helping with the compresses, making sure Thomas took a few sips of water. Then she rode back to the main house and immediately sent one of her own maids, a young woman named Sarah, who'd grown up with 6 younger siblings, to the Miller farm. Mrs. Halloway was waiting in the study when Philippa returned. Dr. Whitmore's fee, the maid's time, the cost of the medicine, you're looking at 10 pounds minimum, she said without preamble. And that's assuming the boy recovers quickly. If this drags on, I don't care about the cost. You should. You're running an estate, not a charity. That boy is my tenant's son. If his family can't work because they're caring for him, that affects my harvest. It's practical. Mrs. Halloway's expression softened slightly. It's also kind, which is going to cause you problems. What do you mean? Word will spread. You help the Millers. Now every tenant with a sick child or a broken fence will come knocking. You set a precedent today, Miss Vane. Make sure it's one you can sustain. Philippa sank into her chair. So what do you suggest? Set clear boundaries. Medical emergencies, yes. General hardship, case by case. But make it known that help is earned, not assumed. Your tenants need to know you'll support them when it matters, but they can't treat you like an endless well. It made sense. Cold, practical sense. I'll speak to them, Philippa said, after Thomas recovers. If he recovers. He will. Mrs. Halloway didn't argue, just nodded and left. Philippa sat alone in her study, staring at the ledger that showed her reserves shrinking faster than she'd planned, and wondered how many more decisions like this she'd have to make before Whitmore Park either thrived or broke her completely. The answer came sooner than expected. 2 days later, Peters appeared with another problem. The western boundary, miss, where your land meets the commons. There's been encroachment. Philippa looked up from her correspondence. What kind of encroachment? Grazing. Someone's been running sheep on your land. Not many, maybe a dozen, but they've been there long enough to do damage to the grass. Whose sheep? Peters hesitated. That's the problem, miss. They belong to Lord Ashford. Philippa set down her pen very carefully. Lord Ashford was old money, old prejudices, and a close friend of Lady Marchmont. He'd declined her garden party invitation without explanation.
Are you certain they're his? They're marked with his brand, miss, clear as day. How long have they been there? At least a week, maybe longer. A week, long enough to be deliberate. Philippa stood. Show me. Mom, it's.
The western boundary was a mess. The stone wall that separated her land from the commons had collapsed in one section, old damage, never repaired, and sheep had wandered through. Or been driven through. They'd trampled a section of grazing land she'd been planning to use for her own livestock. This is intentional, Philippa said, examining the wall. This didn't just collapse. Someone knocked it down. Peters nodded grimly. That's what I thought, miss, but I can't prove it. We don't need to prove it. Those are Ashford's sheep. He's responsible for controlling them. Begging your pardon, miss, but if you accuse Lord Ashford of deliberate trespass without proof, he'll make my life difficult.
I know. Philippa stared at the damaged wall. But if I do nothing, he'll think I'm a target.
And then everyone will think I'm a target. She made a decision. Round up the sheep, all of them. Pen them at the main house. Peters blinked. Miss? You heard me. They're trespassing on my land, causing damage. I'm confiscating them until Lord Ashford pays for repairs to my wall and compensation for the damaged grazing land. Miss Vane? That's going to cause a fight. Good. Let's have it now before he decides to try something worse. Peters looked like he wanted to argue. But he'd learned by now that arguing with Philippa Vane was a losing proposition. The sheep were penned by evening. Philippa sent a formal letter to Lord Ashford the next morning. His response arrived by messenger that afternoon. She opened it, read 3 lines, and felt her blood pressure spike. Miss Vane, your theft of my property is noted and will be addressed through proper legal channels. Return the sheep immediately or face consequences. Ashford theft. He'd called it theft. Philippa grabbed her writing paper and composed a response so scathing that Mrs. Halloway, reading over her shoulder, actually whistled. You sure you want to send that? Absolutely. It's going to escalate things. Let it escalate. I'm done being subtle. The letter went out within the hour. Lord Ashford arrived in person the next day. He came with his estate manager and 2 workers, clearly intending to reclaim his sheep by force if necessary. Philippa met them at the gate with Peters and 3 of her own farm workers.
Lord Ashford, she said, how kind of you to visit. Cut the pleasantries, Miss Vane. Release my sheep immediately. I will.
As soon as you pay for repairs to the wall, your sheep destroyed in compensation for the grazing land they damaged.
My sheep destroyed nothing. That wall was already falling down. Then you should have repaired it before your livestock wandered onto my property. The commons border that section. My sheep have grazed there for decades. The commons border it, yes. My land does not include the commons. Your sheep crossed the boundary. That's trespassing. Okay. Lord Ashford's face went red. You're being ridiculous. This is how things work in the country, Miss Vane. Perhaps if you'd grown up here instead of in some industrial slum, you'd understand. I understand property law perfectly well, Lord Ashford. Perhaps if you'd bothered to maintain your fences, we wouldn't be having this conversation. Those sheep are leaving with me today. No, they're not. He took a step forward. Peters and the farm workers moved to flank Philippa. You're making a grave mistake, Lord Ashford said, voice low and dangerous. I don't think I am, but I suppose we'll find out. For a moment, she thought he might actually try to force the issue. His hands clenched. His workers looked ready to move. Then a voice cut across the tension. Is there a problem here? Everyone turned. The Duke of Harwell sat astride his horse at the edge of the drive, watching the standoff with an expression of mild interest. Lord Ashford's posture changed immediately. Your Grace, this doesn't concern you. Doesn't it? I heard raised voices from the road. Thought I'd make sure Miss Vane wasn't being harassed on her own property. I'm reclaiming my stolen livestock. Stolen? The Duke dismounted, walked forward with that same controlled grace. That's a serious accusation. Do you have evidence? The sheep are in her pen. After they trespassed on her land. I assume you've offered to pay for the damage? Lord Ashford's jaw tightened. The wall was already broken.
Then you should have repaired it. That's basic animal husbandry, Ashford. Surely you know that. The implication was clear. Either Lord Ashford was negligent or he'd allowed the trespass deliberately. Either way, he looked incompetent. This is none of your business, Harwell. Actually, it is. Miss Vane's western boundary backs onto the commons, which borders my southern fields. If you're not maintaining your fences, your livestock could just as easily end up on my land. I have a vested interest in seeing this resolved properly. Lord Ashford looked between them, Philippa standing firm, the Duke calm and immovable, and clearly realized he'd lost. How much? He said through gritted teeth. Philippa kept her voice level. 50 pounds for wall repairs, 20 pounds for grazing damage. That's highway robbery. That's fair market value. Take it or leave it, Lord Ashford, but the sheep don't leave until the debt is settled. He stared at her with pure hatred. Then he pulled out a checkbook, scrawled out the amount, and shoved it at her. Release them. Philippa nodded to Peters. The sheep were brought out and driven back toward the commons. Lord Ashford mounted his horse without another word and rode off, his workers scrambling to follow. Silence fell. The Duke turned to Philippa. You handled that well. You didn't need to intervene. I know, but I wanted to. She studied him. Why? Because Ashford's a bully, and bullies need to know they can't intimidate you with impunity. I could have handled him. Yes, but you shouldn't have to handle everything alone. He paused. That's twice now I've shown up uninvited. I'm starting to make a habit of it. You are. Would you like me to stop? The question hung between them, direct, honest. Philippa should have said yes, should have maintained her independence, her boundaries. Instead, no. Something shifted in his expression. Good. He mounted his horse. Miss Vane? Yes? You have enemies now. Real ones. Ashford won't forget this. Neither will Lady Marchmont. I know. Be careful. He rode away before she could respond. Philippa stood in her drive, check in hand, and realized with perfect clarity that she'd just crossed a line she couldn't uncross. She'd made powerful enemies. And somehow, impossibly, she'd made an ally of the one man she'd sworn to prove herself against. The world felt unsteady beneath her feet. The summer progressed with uneasy quiet. The miller's boy recovered. The western wall was repaired. The first harvest came in better than expected. Not exceptional, but solid. Proof that Whitmore Park was viable. But the social isolation intensified. Invitations stopped coming. The few events Philippa did attend were exercises in polite hostility. Lady Marchmont and Lord Ashford had poisoned the well thoroughly. She was tolerated, not accepted, acknowledged, not welcomed. She told herself it didn't matter. She had work, she had Mrs. Halloway, she had the estate. She didn't need their approval. But humans are social creatures, and isolation wears on even the strongest. It was the Duke who noticed. He started appearing at odd times. A ride past her property that turned into a conversation about crop rotation. A chance meeting at the village that became a discussion about soil drainage. Small things. Casual. Except nothing about the Duke of Harwell was casual. You're doing it again, Philippa said one afternoon in late August. They were standing at the repaired western boundary, ostensibly discussing whether the wall needed reinforcement. Doing what? Showing up, uninvited. You said you didn't want me to stop. I said that once, 2 months ago. You haven't told me to leave since then. I'm taking that as tacit permission. She should have been annoyed. Instead, she was fighting a smile. You're insufferable. You've mentioned that before. It bears repeating. He leaned against the stone wall, studied her. You look tired. I am tired. I'm running an estate. You're running yourself into the ground. When's the last time you took a day off? She couldn't remember. That's not relevant. It's extremely relevant. You can't manage Whitmore if you collapse from exhaustion. I'm not going to collapse. Everyone collapses eventually, Miss Vane. The question is whether you do it gracefully or catastrophically. What a cheerful thought. He smiled, actually smiled. I'm serious. You need rest. An afternoon. An evening. Something. I don't have time each. Make time. He straightened. Tomorrow. 3 o'clock. I'm taking you riding. She blinked. Excuse me? You heard me. Riding. Fresh air, no estate business. Just, he gestured vaguely, a break. I don't need a... I'm not asking, Miss Vane. I'm informing you. 3 o'clock. Don't be late. He walked back toward his horse before she could argue. And if I refuse, she called after him, then I'll show up anyway and we'll have this conversation again. But longer and more annoying. He rode off, leaving her standing there, half furious and half... She refused to finish that thought. But at 3 o'clock the next day, she was ready. They rode east, away from the estates, into the open countryside that bordered the old forest. The Duke set an easy pace, no destination in mind, just movement. For the first mile, they didn't speak. Then, "This is nice," Philippa admitted. "Told you. Don't be smug." "I'm not smug. I'm correct. There's a difference." She laughed. Actually laughed. "You're impossible." "So you keep saying." They rode in comfortable silence for another half-mile. The sun was warm. The air smelled like late summer, dry grass and distant rain. "Can I ask you something?" the Duke said. "That depends on the question. Why Whitmore Park? Truly, you could have bought property anywhere. Why here? Why next to me?" Philippa considered lying, deflecting. But she was tired of deflecting. "Honestly, I don't know anymore. At first it was because you'd dismissed me, evaluated me like livestock, and found me wanting. I wanted to prove you wrong, show you what you'd missed. And now? Now I think I did it because I needed to prove it to myself, that I could run an estate, that I could earn respect on my own terms. You were just..." She paused. "Convenient motivation." He was quiet for a long moment, then, "I'm sorry for that evaluation. You deserved better." "You've apologized already." "I mean it more now than I did then." She glanced at him. "Why?" "Because I understand you better now. What you're trying to build, what it costs." He met her eyes. "You're doing something extraordinary, Miss Vane, and I was too blind to see it." Her throat tightened. "Don't." "Don't what?" "Don't be kind to me. I don't know how to handle it when you're kind." "Then you should practice, because I'm not planning to stop." They stared at each other. Then Philippa spurred her horse forward. "Race you to the oak grove. That's half a mile?" But she was already gone, laughing, and he had no choice but to follow. They reached the oak grove breathless and grinning like children. Dismounted. Let the horses graze. "You cheated," the Duke said. "I had a head start. That's not cheating, that's strategy." "Moo?" "It's absolutely cheating." "Prove it." He moved toward her, not threatening, just close. Close enough that she could see the silver in his hair, the lines around his eyes when he smiled. "You're trouble, Miss Vane." "You're only just realizing that?" "No, I've known it since you walked out of my study. I just didn't know how much I'd enjoy it." Her breath caught. "Your Grace." "Edward." "What?" "My name. It's Edward, and I'm tired of formality. We can't..." "Can't what? Be honest? Have this conversation? People already think..." She stopped, started again. "Lady Marchmont, the rumors. If they see us together, let them talk. They're going to talk regardless. At least this way. There's truth to the gossip." "And what truth is that?" He stepped closer. "That I respect you more than anyone I've ever met. That I was wrong about you in every possible way. That I..." He stopped, seemed to reconsider. "That I'd like the chance to know you. Actually know you. Not as a neighbor, not as a strategic alliance, just as a person." Philippa's heart was hammering. "This is a terrible idea. Probably. It will make everything more complicated. Undoubtedly. I'm not looking for whatever this is. Neither am I, but here we are." She should have walked away, mounted her horse, ended this before it became something she couldn't control. Instead, she said, "I don't know how to do this." "Do what?" "Let someone in. Trust that they won't..." She gestured helplessly. "Won't see me as a transaction." His expression softened. "I already see you, Philippa. Have for months. And there's nothing transactional about it." Her name in his mouth sounded different, intimate. "This is a mistake," she whispered. "Maybe. but I'd rather make the mistake than wonder what we missed. He didn't move closer, didn't push, just waited. Philippa took a breath, made a choice. 1 afternoon a week, she said. No estate business, no strategy, just this. 1 afternoon a week, he agreed. They rode back as the sun started to set, neither speaking but both acutely aware of the shift between them. Something had changed, some line had been crossed, and neither of them could pretend otherwise. They parted at the boundary between their estates. Next week? Edward said. Next week, Philippa confirmed. She rode back to Whitmore Park feeling lighter than she had in months. She should have known it wouldn't last. The letter arrived 3 days later. Mrs. Halloway brought it to her study, face grim. This came express. From London. Philippa opened it, read the first line, felt the world tilt. Miss Vane, it has come to our attention that your conduct with the Duke of Harwell has been noted by several concerned members of local society. As trustees of your father's estate and guardians of his legacy, we feel compelled to intervene. Your reputation is being damaged by these associations. Your business judgment is being questioned. If you continue this path, you risk not only your social standing, but the financial stability of the estate itself. We strongly advise you to sever all personal contact with the Duke and focus on the proper management of Whitmore Park. Failure to do so may result in a review of your father's will and your fitness to manage his assets. Respectfully, the Trust Board. Philippa read it twice. Then she looked at Mrs. Halloway. They're threatening to take Whitmore Park away from me. They're threatening to try. Whether they can is another question. Can they? Mrs. Halloway's silence was answer enough. Philippa set the letter down with shaking hands. This is because of Edward. This is because people like Lady Marchmont and Lord Ashford have influence, and they're using it. So what do I do? You have 2 choices. End things with the Duke and hope that appeases them, or fight. Fight how? By proving them wrong. By making Whitmore Park so successful they can't question your management. By showing that your personal life has no bearing on your professional competence. Mrs. Halloway leaned forward. But that's the hard path, Miss Vane, and there are no guarantees. Philippa stared at the letter until the words blurred. Then she stood. Send word to the Duke. Tell him we need to talk, tonight. Mrs. Halloway didn't argue, just nodded and left. Philippa walked to the window, looked out across her land, her fields, her tenants, everything she'd built, and felt the weight of the choice ahead of her. Fight and risk losing everything, or surrender and lose herself. The answer should have been simple, but nothing about this had ever been simple. Edward arrived after dark, came directly to her study without announcement. His face was tight with concern. What happened? She handed him the letter, watched him read it, watched his expression go cold. They can't do this. They can try. My father's will has provisions. If the trustees believe I'm mismanaging the estate, you're not mismanaging anything. Whitmore Park is thriving. My reputation isn't, and apparently that matters. He set the letter down carefully. This is my fault. No, it is. I defended you publicly. I've been spending time with you. People noticed, and now they're using it against you. Edward, this isn't... What do you want to do? The question stopped her. I don't know, she admitted. If I stop seeing you, maybe they'll back off. Maybe the trustees will drop this. And if they don't, well, then I fight them in court, and probably lose. Or, she met his eyes, or I prove them wrong. Make Whitmore Park so undeniably successful that they have no grounds to challenge me. How long would that take? A year, maybe 2? And in the meantime? In the meantime, her voice cracked, I can't give them any more ammunition, which means no more afternoons, Edward finished quietly. Philippa nodded, not trusting herself to speak. He crossed to her, took her hands in his. Listen to me. I will not be the reason you lose everything you've built. If walking away protects you, I'll do it, without hesitation. I don't want you to walk away. I don't want to either, but I won't let them destroy you because of me. She looked down at their joined hands. This isn't fair. No, it's not. But we'll figure it out, together, even if we have to do it from a distance. Philippa pulled her hands back. You should go, before someone sees you here. He didn't move. Philippa, please, just go. For a moment, she thought he'd refuse. Stay. Fight. Then he nodded. I'll go, but this isn't over. It has to be. No, it doesn't. We just need time and strategy. He walked to the door, paused. I meant what I said. In the oak grove, all of it. Then he left. Philippa stood alone in her study, staring at the letter from the trustees, and felt something inside her harden into resolve. They wanted her to choose between the estate and everything else. Fine. She'd choose the estate. She'd prove them all wrong. And then, only then, she'd take back everything they'd tried to force her to surrender. But standing there in the silence, watching Edward's figure disappear into the darkness beyond her window, she couldn't shake the terrible, crushing fear that by the time she won, there'd be nothing left to take back. But standing there in the silence, watching Edward's figure disappear into the darkness beyond her window, she couldn't shake the terrible, crushing fear that by the time she won, there'd be nothing left to take back. She didn't sleep that night. Instead, Philippa sat at her desk and made lists, cold, practical lists. What she needed to accomplish, how long it would take, what it would cost. In money, in time, in pieces of herself she wasn't sure she could afford to lose. By dawn, she had a plan. It was brutal, unforgiving, and it would require her to become exactly the kind of ruthless she'd never wanted to be. Mrs. Halloway found her still at the desk when the sun came up. You look like hell, the older woman said without preamble. I feel worse. What did the Duke say? That he'd walk away if it protected me. Are you going to let him? Philippa looked up. Her eyes felt like sandpaper. I don't have a choice. If the trustees move against me, if they challenge my father's will, I lose everything. The estate, the tenants, all of it. I can't let that happen. So you're going to what? Lock yourself away? Prove you're the perfect little landowner they want you to be? Well, I'm going to make Whitmore Park so profitable they can't touch me. And then she stopped. And then what, Philippa didn't answer. Couldn't. Because the truth was she didn't know what came after. She was operating on pure survival instinct now, and survival didn't leave room for hope. Get some sleep, Mrs. Halloway said finally. You're no good to anyone like this. I don't have time to sleep. Make time. That's an order. Philippa wanted to argue, but Mrs. Halloway's expression left no room for negotiation. She slept for 4 hours and woke up feeling worse than before. The next 3 months became a blur of work that bordered on obsession. Philippa threw herself into Whitmore Park with single-minded intensity. She restructured the crop rotation schedule, negotiated better prices with merchants in London, personally oversaw the repair of every building on the estate. She was everywhere, in the fields, in the barns, in the tenant cottages, solving problems, making decisions, driving everyone, including herself, past reasonable limits. The estate responded, harvest yields increased, tenant satisfaction improved. The books started showing consistent profit for the first time in years, but the cost was visible. Philippa grew thin, sharp. Her smiles became rare and brittle. She stopped attending social events entirely, not because of the isolation, but because she genuinely didn't have time. Every hour was accounted for, every minute allocated. She saw Edward exactly twice during those 3 months. The first time was by accident. They crossed paths in the village. She was meeting with a grain merchant. He was picking up supplies from the blacksmith. They exchanged polite greetings. Nothing more. The distance between them felt like a physical thing. The second time was deliberate on his part. He appeared at her boundary fence on a cold November morning, clearly having ridden over from Thornfield specifically to see her. You're avoiding me, he said without preamble. I'm working. You're destroying yourself. Philippa didn't look up from the fence post she was examining. That's dramatic. It's true. Look at you, Philippa. When's the last time you ate a full meal? Slept more than 4 hours? I'm fine. You're not fine. He stopped. Started again, voice softer. You're breaking yourself apart trying to prove something that shouldn't need proving. It does need proving, unless you've forgotten the letter from the trustees. I haven't forgotten, but there has to be a better way than this. There isn't. He dismounted, walked to where she stood, close enough that she had to acknowledge him. "Talk to me," he said quietly. "Actually, talk to me. Not this. This wall you've built. I can't afford to talk. I can't afford to feel. I can't afford—" Her voice cracked. She swallowed hard, forced it level. "You. I can't afford you. Because of what other people might think, because I'm barely holding this together as it is. And if I let myself want something I can't have, I'll fall apart. And I can't fall apart. Too many people are depending on me." Edward was quiet for a long moment. Then, "What if you didn't have to do this alone?" "I am alone. That's the reality." "No. You're choosing to be alone because you think isolation equals strength. But it doesn't, Philippa. It just equals exhaustion." She finally looked at him, really looked, saw the concern in his eyes, the frustration, the something else she refused to name. "Why do you care?" she asked. "Why does it matter to you whether I work myself to death?" Because he stopped, seemed to weigh his next words carefully. "Because I can't watch you do this and not say something. Because someone needs to tell you that proving them wrong isn't worth losing yourself. Because—" Another pause. Then, quietly, "Because I care about you. More than is probably wise." Her breath caught. "Don't," she whispered. "Don't what? Don't tell you the truth? Don't make this harder than it already is." "I'm trying to make it easier, Bet." "You can't. Nobody can. I have to do this. And I have to do it alone." She turned away before he could respond, walked back toward her horse. "Philippa, please, just leave me alone, for both our sakes." She rode away without looking back, but she felt his gaze on her the entire way home. December brought the first real crisis. One of the tenant farms, the Carters, a family who'd been struggling all season, defaulted on rent. Not by choice. Their eldest son had been injured in a farming accident. The medical bills had drained their reserves. Mrs. Halloway brought Philippa the news in the study. "They're 2 months behind. They're asking for an extension. How bad is the son's injury?" "Broken leg. Won't be able to work for another month at minimum." "Boss?" "Shamaida." Philippa did the math. 2 months rent plus the month they'd need to catch up. 3 months total. Can they make it up in spring? Possibly, if the planning goes well, but it's a risk. A risk. Everything was a risk these days. Philippa thought about the trustees' letter, about the scrutiny she was under, about how any sign of mismanagement would be used against her. A smart landowner would evict the Carters, bring in new tenants who could pay. A kind landowner would forgive the debt entirely. Philippa was trying to be neither smart nor kind. She was trying to survive. "Tell them they have until March," she said finally. "If they can't pay by then, we'll reassess. But make it clear this is a one-time exception." Mrs. Halloway nodded. "You're sure?" "No, but it's the right thing to do." "The trustees won't see it that way if they find out." "Then we make sure they don't find out." The decision cost her sleep for the next week. But when she saw Mrs. Carter in the village a few days later, the woman's eyes filled with tears of gratitude. "Miss Vane, I can't thank you enough." "Don't thank me yet," Philippa said. "Pay your rent in March. That's thanks enough." She walked away before the conversation could get emotional. But something in her chest loosened slightly. The winter progressed. The estate remained stable. The books stayed in the black, barely, but enough. And slowly, very slowly, people began to notice. It started small. A merchant in the village mentioning that Whitmore Park's grain quality had improved dramatically. A neighboring landowner asking Mrs. Halloway about her crop rotation strategy. Small acknowledgments that the estate was being run well. Then came the article. Philippa was reviewing accounts when Peters knocked. "Miss Vane, you're going to want to see this." He handed her a copy of the Kent Agricultural Journal, a quarterly publication that reported on farming innovations and estate management across the county. On page 6, there was an article titled "Modern Estate Management, a Case Study." The case study was Whitmore Park. Philippa read it twice, certain she'd misunderstood. But no. There it was. A detailed analysis of Whitmore's turnaround, from failing estate to profitable operation in under a year. The article praised the innovative management strategies and sound financial practices. It didn't mention Philippa by name, just referred to the current landowner. But everyone would know who they meant. "How did this happen?" she asked Peters. "Mrs. Halloway, she submitted the case study anonymously 3 months ago. Thought it might help with the trustees if you had third-party validation of your work." Philippa looked at Mrs. Halloway, who'd appeared in this doorway. "You did this?" "Don't thank me yet. Could backfire if people decide to dig deeper into who's actually running the place. But I figured it was worth the risk." Philippa set down this journal. "You know, this doesn't solve the fundamental problem. The trustees aren't concerned about my competence. They're concerned about my reputation, which is precisely why this matters. Competence is objective. Reputation is subjective. If we can make your competence so undeniable that it overrides their subjective nonsense, we win." That's optimistic. I prefer strategic. The article did exactly what Mrs. Halloway hoped. Within 2 weeks, Philippa received 3 letters. One from a farming cooperative asking about her methods, one from a neighboring estate requesting a consultation, and one from a London investment group interested in discussing potential partnerships. She declined the partnerships, too risky, too much scrutiny, but accepted the consultation request. The consultation turned into 2 more. By January, Philippa Vane had quietly become known as one of the most effective estate managers in Kent, not openly, not socially. The drawing room still closed to her. Lady Marchmont still cut her dead at church. But in the practical world of agriculture and land management, her reputation was growing. And then came the County Agricultural Assembly. It was an annual event, landowners, estate managers, merchants, and farmers gathering to discuss innovations, share strategies, and network. Philippa had never attended, hadn't seen the point when she was being socially ostracized. But this year, she received a formal invitation, not a social invitation, a professional one. The organizing committee requested that she present on rapid estate recovery, methods, and results. She stared at the invitation for a full 5 minutes. "Are you going to do it?" Mrs. Halloway asked. "This is a trap. It has to be. Or it's an opportunity. To be publicly humiliated by people who already hate me? Is to prove them wrong in front of the entire county. On your terms. In your arena." Philippa looked at the invitation again. The assembly was in 3 weeks. "I'll need data, yield reports, financial summaries, comparative analysis. Already started compiling it." "Of course you have," Mrs. Halloway smiled. "So that's a yes?" Philippa took a breath. "That's a yes." The next 3 weeks were a different kind of hell. Philippa prepared obsessively. She compiled every piece of relevant data, created charts and graphs, practiced her presentation until she could deliver it in her sleep. This had to be perfect, unassailable. One mistake and they'd tear her apart. Edward sent a note 2 days before the assembly. "I heard you're presenting. I'll be there." Short. To the point. But the fact that he had sent it at all made her chest tight. She didn't respond. The day of the assembly arrived cold and clear. Philippa dressed carefully. Professional, severe, a dark blue dress that said competence more than femininity. She wore her hair pulled back tight. No jewelry except her father's watch chain. Armor. The assembly was held at the county hall, a large room with high ceilings and rows of chairs facing a raised platform. When Philippa arrived, the room was already half full. She took a seat near the back, trying to blend in. It didn't work. Heads turned. Whispers started. She felt the weight of every eye, every judgment. Lady Marchmont was there, seated in the front row with Lord Ashford and several other members of the old guard. They looked at Philippa like she was something distasteful they'd found on their shoe. Edward was there too. 3 rows back, on the opposite side. He caught her eye, nodded once. She looked away quickly. The assembly began. Several presentations on various topics: new plowing techniques, livestock breeding strategies, market pricing analysis, all delivered by men, all received politely. Then the moderator called her name. Miss Philippa Vane, presenting on rapid estate recovery. The room went very quiet. Philippa stood, walked to the platform, set her notes on the podium, looked out at a sea of skeptical, hostile, and curious faces, and began. 18 months ago, Whitmore Park was a failing estate. Exhausted soil, broken equipment, demoralized tenants, and financial losses that had been compounding for years. Today, it's profitable, not marginally, substantially. This is how that happened. Oh, she walked them through it, step by step. The soil analysis that revealed nitrogen depletion, the crop rotation strategy that addressed it, the equipment investments prioritized by immediate need versus long-term value, the tenant management structure that balanced support with accountability. She showed them numbers, hard data, comparative yields, financial projections versus actual results. No emotion, no personal story, just facts. The room was silent except for her voice. When she finished, she looked up. Questions? A hand went up immediately. Lord Ashford. Miss Vane, he said, voice dripping condescension. These results are impressive, on paper. But how much of this success is yours versus your estate manager's? There it was, the trap. Philippa smiled, thin, sharp. An excellent question, Lord Ashford. Mrs. Halloway is an exceptional estate manager, and I hired her specifically because of her expertise. But every strategic decision, crop selection, financial allocation, tenant policy, those were mine. Mrs. Halloway executes. I direct. That's how effective management works. And you expect us to believe that a woman with no agricultural background... I expect you to believe the data, which speaks for itself. She gestured to the charts behind her. If you'd like to dispute the yield numbers or the financial reports, I'm happy to provide the original documentation for review, but the results are objective fact, regardless of who achieved them. Ashford's face reddened, but he sat down. Another hand. A merchant Philippa recognized from the village. Miss Vane, your tenant retention is remarkably high. How did you achieve that? By treating them like people instead of assets. Fair rent, responsive maintenance, support during hardship when warranted. It's not revolutionary. It's basic human decency applied to business. A few people actually nodded. More questions followed. Some hostile, some genuinely curious. Philippa answered each one calmly, backed by data, refusing to be rattled. Then Lady Marchmont stood. The room tensed. Miss Vane, she said, voice silk over steel. Your agricultural success is noted, but success in one's professional life doesn't excuse impropriety in one's personal conduct. Surely you recognize that a woman in your position must maintain certain standards. I recognized, Philippa interrupted, that my personal conduct is irrelevant to this presentation. We're discussing estate management, not social propriety. If you'd like to discuss the latter, I suggest you do so in a more appropriate venue. This is not it. The room went dead silent. Lady Marchmont's eyes flashed. How dare... How dare I what? Focus on the topic at hand? Refuse to be derailed by personal attacks disguised as concern? Philippa stepped out from behind the podium. Lady Marchmont, you've made your feelings about me abundantly clear. You don't approve of my methods, my background, or my choices. That's your prerogative. But this assembly is about agriculture and land management, not your personal grievances. So unless you have a question relevant to the presentation, I suggest you sit down. The silence was absolute. Everyone was staring at Lady Marchmont, waiting. For once in her life, Lady Marchmont had no response. She sat down. Philippa looked out at the room. Any other questions? Relevant ones? No hands went up. Then I'll conclude by saying this. Whitmore Park succeeded because I refused to accept that failure was inevitable. I studied. I hired expertise. I made difficult decisions. And I worked harder than I've ever worked in my life. My methods aren't perfect, but they're effective, and they're available to anyone willing to put in the same effort. Thank you. She walked off the platform. The room erupted. Not in applause, she hadn't expected applause, but in immediate, animated conversation. People arguing, debating, discussing what they'd just witnessed. Philippa made it to the back of the room before someone intercepted her. Edward. That was... He stopped, started again. You were extraordinary. I was desperate. You were brilliant. You just publicly dismantled Lady Marchmont in front of the entire county. I probably just made everything worse. No, You changed the conversation permanently. People are going to remember this. She wanted to believe him, but she was shaking so hard she could barely stand. I need to leave, she said quietly. I'll walk you out. You don't need to. I'm walking you out. They made it to her carriage before anyone else could intercept them. Edward helped her up, then stepped back. Philippa? She looked down at him. Whatever happens next, with the trustees, with society, with all of it, you just proved you can handle it. You stood in front of people who wanted you to fail, and you didn't just survive. You dominated, don't forget that. Something in her chest cracked open. Thank you, she whispered. He nodded, stepped back. She signaled the driver and left. The response came faster than expected. 3 days after the assembly, she received a letter from the trustees. Philippa opened it with hands that wanted to shake. Force them steady. Miss Vane, we have reviewed recent reports regarding Whitmore Park's management and financial performance. Additionally, we attended the County Agricultural Assembly where you presented your methods and results. While we maintain concerns regarding certain aspects of your personal conduct, we cannot dispute the objective success of your estate management. The financial records are sound. The property value has increased. The operation is profitable and sustainable. After considerable deliberation, the board has voted to suspend any review of your father's will at this time. You will continue as primary manager and beneficiary of the estate, subject to annual financial audits. We trust you will continue to prioritize Whitmore Park's success and maintain appropriate standards in all aspects of your conduct. Respectfully, the Trust Board. Philippa read it 3 times. Then she set it down very carefully and put her head in her hands. She'd won. Not completely, not without conditions and continued scrutiny, but she'd won. Mrs. Halloway found her like that 10 minutes later. Good news or bad news? Philippa handed her the letter without speaking. Mrs. Halloway read it, then smiled, a real smile, not the sharp professional one. You did it. We did it. Don't diminish this, you fought them and won. That's not nothing. Philippa looked up. It doesn't feel like winning. It feels like I've been holding my breath for 6 months and I can finally exhale, but I've forgotten how. Then learn again. Take a day. Rest. Stop driving yourself into the ground. I don't know how to stop. Then figure it out, because this... Mrs. Halloway gestured at the letter, at Philippa, at everything. This is only the beginning. You've proven you can survive. Now you need to figure out how to actually live. She left before Philippa could respond. Philippa sat alone in her study, staring at the letter from the trustees, and felt the full weight of the last 6 months finally settle on her shoulders. She'd sacrificed everything: her health, her peace, her connection to the one person who'd seen her as something more than a transaction or a threat. And she'd won, but victory felt hollow when there was no one to share it with. She pulled out a piece of paper, stared at it for 20 minutes. Then, finally, she began to write. Edward, the trustees have suspended their review. Whitmore Park is secure. I need to see you, not to discuss estates or strategy or anything practical, just to see you, if you're willing. P. She sealed it before she could second-guess herself, sent it express that afternoon. His response arrived the next morning. Just 2 words. Tomorrow. 3 o'clock. Philippa stood in her drive at 3 o'clock the next day, heart hammering, watching the road. Edward appeared exactly on time. He dismounted, walked toward her, stopped a few feet away. They stared at each other. Then Philippa said the words she'd been holding back for 6 months. I'm sorry for shutting you out, for pushing you away, for trying to do everything alone when I didn't have to. You were protecting yourself. I was terrified of losing the estate, of proving everyone right, of... She stopped, forced herself to continue, of letting myself want something and having it taken away. Edward took a step closer. And now I'm still terrified, but I'm more terrified of spending the rest of my life safe and alone than I am of taking a risk. Philippa, I know this is complicated. I know there are 100 reasons this is a terrible idea. I know. He closed the distance between them, took her hands in his. Stop, he said quietly. Stop listing reasons we shouldn't do this and tell me what you actually want. She looked up at him. You. I want you. His expression softened into something she'd never seen before. Relief, joy, something that looked dangerously like love. "Then have me," he said. "I'm yours. Have been for months. Probably since you walked out of my study and I realized I'd just made the biggest mistake of my life." Philippa felt something break open in her chest, something that had been locked down and frozen for so long she'd forgotten it was there. "This is going to cause problems," she whispered. "Undoubtedly. People are going to talk. Let them. Lady Marchmont is going to have an apoplectic fit. Good. I hope it's spectacular." She laughed. Actually laughed. The sound felt foreign. Edward smiled. "There she is." "Who?" "The woman I fell in love with. The one who's been buried under 6 months of survival mode." Her breath caught. "You what?" "I love you," he said simply. "Have for a while now. Thought you should know." Philippa stared at him. This man who'd started as an adversary, become an ally, and somehow transformed into something essential. "I don't know how to do this," she admitted. "Neither do I, but I'm willing to figure it out if you are." She thought about the trustees' letter, about the estate that was finally barely stable, about everything she'd fought for and nearly destroyed herself to achieve, and she realized that none of it meant anything if she spent her life alone. "Yes," she said, "I'm willing." Edward pulled her close. "Good, because I'm not giving you up without a fight." "I don't think you'd have to fight very hard." "No? No. I'm fairly invested at this point." He laughed, then kissed her. And for the first time in 6 months, Philippa Vane stopped calculating, stopped strategizing, stopped fighting, and just let herself feel. They stood there in her drive for a long moment, holding each other like they'd been doing it for years instead of seconds, like they'd finally found something they'd been searching for without knowing what it was. When they finally pulled apart, Edward's expression had shifted from relief to something more complicated. "What?" Philippa asked. "We need to talk about the practical realities of this." "You just told me you loved me and now you want to talk logistics?" "I told you I loved you. Now I'm making sure we don't destroy what we just started by being careless." He took her hand, led her toward the garden bench. "Sit with me." They sat. The afternoon sun slanted across Whitmore Park, turning everything gold. "The trustees backed off," Edward said, "but they're watching, and so is everyone else. Lady Marchmont, Ashford, half the county. They're waiting for you to make a mistake they can use against you." "I know. And if we do this, if we make this public, they will use it. They'll call it improper. They'll say you're compromising your judgment. They'll find a way to make it ugly." Philippa looked at him steadily. "Are you trying to talk me out of this?" "No. I'm making sure you understand the cost, because I won't be the reason you lose everything you've built." "You won't be, but I appreciate the concern." She squeezed his hand. "Edward, I spent 6 months proving I could run an estate. I'm not going to spend the rest of my life proving I deserve to be happy. If they want to judge me for choosing you, let them. I'm done living for their approval." He smiled slightly. "That's a significant shift from 6 months ago." 6 months ago, I was terrified they'd take Whitmore Park away. Now? She gestured at the estate around them. "Now I know what I'm capable of. And if they try to come for me again, I'll beat them again. But I'm not going to live in fear of what they might do." "You're sure?" "I'm sure." Edward lifted her hand, kissed her knuckles. "Then we do this properly. No hiding. No sneaking around. We court openly, we're honest about our intentions, and we don't give them ammunition by being reckless." That sounds remarkably sensible for someone who just declared their love in the middle of the afternoon. "I contain multitudes." She laughed. Apparently. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sun move across the fields. Then Philippa said, "There's going to be a scandal. Undoubtedly. Oh, Lady Marchmont is going to lose her mind. I'm counting on it." "You're terrible. You love it." She did, frighteningly so. The scandal broke within a week. It started the way these things always started,
with someone seeing Edward's horse at Whitmore Park too frequently, with whispers at the village shop, with pointed looks at church. Then Lady Marchmont got involved. She called an emergency meeting of the local Women's Charitable Society, an organization Philippa had never been invited to join, and made her position clear. The Duke of Harwell is being led astray by a woman of questionable character and dubious background. It's our duty as women of standing to make him see reason before he makes a terrible mistake. The problem was that several women in the society had attended the agricultural assembly, had seen Philippa present, had been impressed despite themselves. One of them, Mrs. Whitmore, the doctor's wife, actually spoke up. With respect, Lady Marchmont, Miss Vane has proven herself quite capable. Her estate is thriving, her tenants are content, and she's revolutionized agricultural practices in the county. Perhaps we should be less concerned with her character and more impressed by her competence. Lady Marchmont's face went rigid. Competence is not the same as propriety, and propriety without competence is just performance, Mrs. Whitmore replied. I'd rather have a capable neighbor than a proper one. The room split. Half the women agreed with Lady Marchmont. Half, quietly, tentatively, sided with Mrs. Whitmore. The consensus fractured. And once consensus fractured, Lady Marchmont's power began to crack. Philippa heard about it secondhand from Mrs. Halloway, who heard it from the butcher's wife, who'd been at the meeting. You're becoming divisive, Mrs. Halloway said, which means you're becoming powerful. I'm not trying to be powerful. I'm trying to run my estate and live my life. That's what makes it effective. You're not playing their game. You're playing your own, and they don't know how to counter that. They'll figure it out eventually. Maybe, but by then, you'll be too established to dislodge. Philippa hoped she was right. Edward proposed in March. Not in some grand romantic gesture. Just the two of them, riding the boundary between their estates on a clear spring morning. They'd stopped near the oak grove, the place where they'd first admitted wanting more than strategic distance, and Edward said without preamble, "Marry me." Philippa's horse shifted beneath her. What? Marry me. I know it's complicated. I know there will be opposition, but I don't care. I want to spend my life with you. Say yes. She stared at him. That's possibly the least romantic proposal I've ever heard. You want romance? Fine. He dismounted, pulled her down from her horse, took both her hands. Philippa Vane, you are the most extraordinary woman I've ever met. You're brilliant, stubborn, impossible, and utterly fearless. You walked into my study 18 months ago, and I treated you like a transaction. You walked out and proved me wrong about everything. You bought the estate next to mine and turned it into a masterpiece. You stood in front of the entire county and refused to be diminished. You've fundamentally changed how I see the world, how I see myself, and what I want my life to be. I love you, completely. Marry me. Okay. Philippa felt tears prick her eyes. That's better. Is it good enough for a yes? It's good enough for a yes. He kissed her, then pulled back, grinning. We're going to cause absolute chaos. And I know. Your trustees are going to have opinions. They can keep them. Lady Marchmont might actually have a stroke. We can only hope. He laughed, pulled her close again. When? When what? When do you want to get married? Philippa considered. June. After the spring planting is finished and before harvest starts. I want Mrs. Halloway to have time to prepare the estate, and I want the tenants to see that Whitmore Park doesn't collapse just because I'm getting married. Practical to the end. You knew what you were getting into. I did, and I wouldn't change a thing. They rode back to Whitmore Park together, hands occasionally brushing, both acutely aware that everything was about to change again. The engagement announcement went out the next week. The response was immediate and polarized. Half the county was scandalized. How dare the Duke lower himself to marry new money? How dare Miss Vane presume to reach above her station? The other half was pragmatic. The Duke needed capital. Miss Vane had capital and had proven she could manage it effectively. It was a sound strategic alliance. A small third faction, the one Philippa cared about most, actually seemed happy for them. Mrs. Whitmore sent a warm, congratulatory note. Several of the tenant farmers from both estates expressed genuine pleasure. Even the vicar, who'd always been neutral in the social warfare, offered sincere blessings. But the opposition was fierce.
Lady Marchmont wrote a scathing letter to the Duke, which he showed Philippa over dinner one evening at Thornfield. "Listen to this," he said, reading aloud. "Your Grace, I feel it is my duty to inform you that this engagement is being viewed with grave concern by all right-thinking members of society. Miss Vane, while financially secure, lacks the breeding, refinement, and moral character expected of a duchess. I urge you to reconsider before irrevocably damaging your family's reputation." Philippa took a sip of wine. "She's warming up to me." Edward laughed. "Should I respond?" "Only if you want to add fuel to the fire. I'm tempted to tell her that Miss Vane has more moral character in her little finger than Lady Marchmont has in her entire judgmental body." "Don't. It's not worth it. You're being remarkably restrained." "I'm choosing my battles. Lady Marchmont isn't worth fighting. She's a symptom, not the disease." Edward set down the letter. "And what is the disease?" "A social order that values appearance over substance, birth over ability, and conformity over excellence. We're not going to change that overnight, but we can refuse to participate in it." "By getting married. By getting married. By running our estates well. By proving that competence and character matter more than bloodlines and propriety." He reached across the table, took her hand. "When did you become an idealist?" "When I realized that surviving wasn't enough. I want to actually live, and I want the world we live in to be better than the one we inherited." "That's ambitious." "You knew what you were getting into," she repeated. "I did, and I still wouldn't change a thing." The wedding planning became a battlefield. Philippa wanted something simple. Edward's family traditions demanded something grand. They compromised on something in between, large enough to be appropriate for a duke's wedding, intimate enough to feel personal. The guest list was the hardest part. "We have to invite Lady Marchmont," Edward's solicitor said. "She's part of the county hierarchy. Excluding her would be seen as petty." "Including her gives her a platform to cause problems," Philippa countered. "She'll cause problems whether we invite her or not. At least this way she's causing them where we can see her." Philippa conceded the point. The invitation went out. Lady Marchmont accepted with a note so cold it could have frozen water. Lord Ashford declined entirely, which was honestly a relief. The weeks before the wedding blurred together. Estate management, wedding preparations, social obligations, and the constant low-level stress of knowing half the county was waiting for her to fail. 3 days before the wedding, Philippa had a breakdown. Not a public one, not a dramatic collapse, just she was in her study reviewing seating arrangements and suddenly couldn't breathe. Mrs. Halloway found her hyperventilating into her hands. "What happened?" "I can't do this." "Do what? Get married? Run the estate? Breathe? All of it? Any of it? I don't..." Philippa gulped air. "I don't know how to be a duchess. I don't know how to navigate that world. I'm going to embarrass Edward. I'm going to embarrass myself, and everyone's going to say they knew I wasn't good enough. Stop!" Mrs. Halloway knelt beside the chair, took Philippa's hands. "Look at me." Philippa did. "You turned a failing estate into one of the most profitable operations in the county in less than 2 years. You faced down the entire agricultural assembly and won. You've beaten every challenge thrown at you. Being a duchess? That's just another challenge, and you're going to beat that too. What if I don't? Then you'll figure it out as you go, like you've figured out everything else. You don't need to be perfect, Philippa. You just need to be yourself. That's always been enough." Philippa's breathing slowly evened out. "When did you become a philosopher?" "I've always been a philosopher. You've just been too busy to notice." "Thank you." "Don't thank me. Just don't have a panic attack before the wedding. I've already planned the seating arrangements, and I'm not redoing them." Philippa laughed weakly. "Noted. Done." Philippa laughed. The wedding day arrived with unseasonably perfect weather. Philippa woke at dawn, couldn't get back to sleep, and ended up walking the estate one last time as Miss Vane. By noon, she'd be the Duchess of Harwell. Everything would change. Everything had already changed. She found Mrs. Halloway in the fields, checking on the spring wheat. "Shouldn't you be getting dressed?" the older woman asked. "I have time. Wanted to see the estate first." They walked the rows together in comfortable silence. Finally, Mrs. Halloway said, "You're scared. Terrified." "Good. Means you're taking it seriously. She paused. You know this doesn't change anything that matters, right? You're still going to be you, just with a different title. Am I? Or am I going to become whatever a duchess is supposed to be and lose myself in the process? You're going to redefine what a duchess is. Same way you redefined what a landowner could be. Stop thinking of this as conforming to their expectations and start thinking of it as setting new ones. Boy, Philippa stopped walking. You make it sound simple. It's not simple, but it's not impossible either. You've already proven that. She had, hadn't she? Come on, Mrs. Halloway said. Let's get you married. The ceremony was held at the parish church, a small stone building that had witnessed centuries of weddings, baptisms, and funerals. Simple, traditional, packed to capacity. Philippa walked down the aisle alone. No father to give her away, no family to stand with her. Just her, in a dress that had cost a small fortune but felt like armor, walking toward a man who'd somehow become the most important thing in her world. Edward stood at the altar, looking simultaneously nervous and certain. When she reached him, he whispered, "You're stunning. You're biased. Doesn't make it less true." The ceremony was mercifully brief. The vows were traditional. When the vicar pronounced them married, Edward kissed her like they were alone instead of in front of 200 people. Someone in the back, Philippa suspected Mrs. Halloway, actually cheered. The reception was held at Thornfield. Edward had insisted, and Philippa hadn't argued. Whitmore Park was hers. Philippa. Thornfield would become theirs. It felt right. The great hall had been transformed. Flowers everywhere, long tables laden with food, music from a small orchestra in the corner. It was beautiful in a way that made Philippa's chest tight. They greeted guests, accepted congratulations, endured the usual wedding nonsense, and then Lady Marchmont approached. She looked like she'd swallowed something bitter and was trying to smile through it. "Your Grace," she said to Edward. Then, after a painful pause, "Your Grace," to Philippa. It was the first time anyone had addressed Philippa by her new title. The first time Lady Marchmont had acknowledged her as an equal. "Lady Marchmont," Philippa replied, voice level. "Thank you for coming. I wouldn't miss it." The smile was still strained. "I hope you'll both be very happy." It was probably the most insincere well-wishing Philippa had ever received. But it was also an acknowledgement, a concession. "Thank you," Edward said. "We intend to be." Lady Marchmont drifted away. Philippa exhaled slowly. "That was painful to watch," Edward murmured. "That was her surrendering, as close as she'll ever come anyway." "How does it feel?" "Anticlimactic, honestly. I spent months terrified of her opinion, and now that I have her forced approval, it doesn't matter. That's growth. That's exhaustion." He laughed, pulled her onto the dance floor. "Dance with me, Duchess." "I'm a terrible dancer." "I know. I don't care, yo." They danced badly and didn't care. Around them, the reception continued. People talked, laughed, celebrated, or judged, depending on their nature. Philippa didn't care about that either. For the first time in 2 years, she felt something close to peace. The following weeks established a new rhythm. Philippa and Edward divided their time between Thornfield and Whitmore Park. She continued managing her estate with Mrs. Halloway's help. Edward brought her into Thornfield's management, genuinely interested in her opinions and strategies. They argued, frequently, about crop rotation and tenant policy and whether the South Fields needed drainage work, but the arguments were productive, collaborative. They were building something together. The county adjusted, slowly, reluctantly in some cases. But the Agricultural Journal published a follow-up article on Whitmore Park's continued success under the new Duchess of Harwell's management. Several neighboring estates quietly reached out for consultation. The tenants on both properties reported higher satisfaction than they had in years. Results spoke louder than gossip. In May, Philippa received an unexpected letter. She opened it in the Thornfield study, her study now, Edward had insisted, and read it twice before believing what she was seeing. "Your Grace, the London Agricultural Society requests your presence at our annual symposium to present on modern estate management practices. We would be honored to have you as our keynote speaker. Respectfully, the Board of Directors." She walked the letter to Edward's study in a daze. "I've been invited to speak in London. He looked up from his correspondence. The Agricultural Society? Yes. How did you know? Because I recommended you, months ago. Didn't think they'd actually listen. You what? He stood, came around the desk. You're the most innovative estate manager in England, Philippa. Why shouldn't you share that expertise? Because I'm... She stopped. Because what? A woman? New money? She'd proven both of those objections irrelevant. Because you're afraid? Edward offered gently. Yes. Then do it anyway. Show them what you showed Kent. Show them what real competence looks like. She looked at the letter again. This is enormous. You can handle enormous. You've been doing it for 2 years. What if I fail? Then you'll fail spectacularly and learn something in the process. But you won't fail. You're too stubborn for that. She laughed despite herself. When did you become my biggest supporter? The moment I stopped being an idiot and actually saw you. Yeah. Philippa accepted the invitation. The London Symposium was in July. She prepared the way she'd prepared for the county assembly, obsessively, thoroughly, leaving nothing to chance. Edward came with her. Not to present, just to be there. The symposium was held in a grand hall twice the size of the county building, filled with landowners, estate managers, agricultural innovators from across England. Philippa stood backstage, fighting down panic, and felt Edward's hand on her shoulder. You've got this. What if they hate it? They won't. But what if... Philippa, look at me. She did. You're about to walk onto that stage and fundamentally change how agricultural management is taught in this country. You're going to be brilliant, and I'm going to be sitting in the third row being insufferably proud of you. Now go. She went. The presentation was 90 minutes. She covered everything: soil analysis, crop rotation, tenant management, financial planning, long-term sustainability. She showed data, comparative studies, real results from real estates. And she talked about the human element, about treating tenants as partners rather than assets, about balancing profit with responsibility, about building something that would last beyond a single generation. When she finished, the room was silent. Then someone started clapping, then another person. Then the entire hall rose in a standing ovation. Philippa stood at the podium, overwhelmed, watching hundreds of people acknowledge her work, her expertise, her right to be there. She found Edward in the third row, grinning like a fool. The questions afterward went on for an hour. Estate managers wanted specifics, landowners wanted advice. 3 different agricultural colleges asked if she'd consider teaching. By the time it ended, Philippa was exhausted and exhilarated in equal measure. Edward found her in the corridor after. How do you feel? Like I just changed my entire life, Ishori. You did. You just became the most sought-after agricultural consultant in England. That's insane. That's reality. How you handle it is up to you. Philippa leaned against the wall, let herself feel the weight of it. I think I want to write a book. Compile everything I've learned. Make it accessible to anyone who wants to improve their estate management. That's brilliant. It's ambitious. You're ambitious, always have been. She smiled. I suppose I am. So they returned to Kent a week later to find that word of the London presentation had preceded them. Suddenly, Philippa was receiving correspondence from estates across England, requests for consultation, questions about methods, invitations to speak at other symposiums. Mrs. Halloway handled most of it, filtering the genuine requests from the time wasters. You're becoming famous, she said one afternoon. I'm becoming busy. There's a difference. Is there? Because from where I'm sitting, you've fundamentally changed agricultural management in England and people are finally recognizing it. I just applied common sense and good business practices. Exactly. Which apparently no one else thought to do. That's what makes it revolutionary. Philippa looked at the stack of correspondence. I can't respond to all of this. Then don't. Pick the ones that matter, the ones that can actually create change. Delegate the rest. To whom? Mrs. Halloway smiled. I might know a few competent women who'd be interested in estate management consultation, if you're willing to train them. You want me to start a consulting firm? I want you to build something that outlasts you, something that changes how estates are run across England. You've proven the methods work. Now scale them. It was ambitious, possibly insane. It was also exactly right. Let's do it, Philippa said. By autumn, they'd established the framework. Philippa trained 3 women, all experienced in various aspects of estate management, all intelligent and driven, all frustrated by the limitations placed on them because of their gender. She taught them everything: soil analysis, financial planning, tenant relations, strategic thinking, how to present ideas to men who didn't want to listen, how to prove themselves in rooms that didn't want them there. One of them, a sharp-minded woman named Catherine, who'd been managing her brother's estate unofficially for years, turned out to be a natural. "You're going to be better at this than I am," Philippa told her after a particularly impressive presentation. "I learned from the best." "You learned from someone who was too stubborn to quit. There's a difference." Catherine smiled. "That's the best kind of teacher." The consulting firm took off faster than Philippa had anticipated. By winter, they had more work than they could handle. Estates across England were requesting their services. The 3 women Philippa had trained were training others. A movement was building. One cold December evening, Philippa and Edward sat in the Thornfield Library, reviewing the year's progress. "Whitmore Park posted record profits," Edward said, looking at the financial reports. "Thornfield's yields are up 30% from last year. And your consulting firm is making more in fees than some estates make in annual revenue." "It's been a good year." It's been an extraordinary year. You've fundamentally changed agricultural management in England, trained a network of women to continue that work, and somehow managed to do it all while being married to me. That's... He shook his head. "I don't even have words for what that is." "Lucky?" "Revolutionary." Philippa set down her own reports. "Can I tell you something?" "Always." "Whoa, it's almost important. 2 years ago, I walked into your study expecting to be treated like a transaction. When you did exactly that, I was angry. But I also believed you were right. That's all I was worth. A dowry and a bloodline." "Philippa, let me finish. I bought Whitmore Park to prove you wrong. But somewhere along the way, it stopped being about you and started being about me. About proving to myself that I was more than my father's money, that I could build something meaningful, that I deserved to exist as myself, not as someone's wife or daughter or investment. You proved that 100 times over, and I know, but I needed to prove it. And you..." She reached for his hand. "You saw it before I did. You saw who I could become, and you stepped back and let me become it. Even when it hurt. Even when I pushed you away. You trusted me to figure it out." Edward pulled her close. "You're giving me too much credit. I was just trying not to screw up again after making such a spectacular mess the first time." "You didn't screw up. You apologized. You changed. That's rarer than you think." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the fire. Then Edward said, "What's next?" "What do you mean?" "You've conquered estate management, built a consulting empire. What's the next challenge?" Philippa considered. "Honestly, I think I want to focus on making this sustainable. Not just the estates, but the whole system. I want to train enough people that this approach becomes standard, not revolutionary. I want to write that book so the knowledge is accessible to anyone, and I want..." She paused. "I want to prove that competence and character matter more than birth or gender. Not just for me, for everyone." "That's ambitious." "You keep saying that like it's a bad thing." "It's not. It's one of the things I love most about you." Spring came again. The estates bloomed, the consulting firm expanded, the book was halfway written. And on a clear morning in late April, Philippa stood at the boundary between Whitmore Park and Thornfield, the place where it had all started, and looked out across the land she'd fought so hard for. Mrs. Halloway found her there. "Feeling nostalgic?" "Reflective." "Same thing." Philippa smiled. "I suppose it is." They stood together in silence. Then Mrs. Halloway said, "You did it, you know. Everything you set out to prove. You're not just a landowner. You're rewriting what a landowner can be." "We did it." You, me, Edward, Catherine, and the others. It wasn't just me. It started with you. The rest of us just followed your lead. I'm not sure I led so much as stumbled forward and hoped for the best. That's what all good leadership looks like from the inside. Hey, Philippa looked at the older woman. "Thank you for everything, for believing in me when no one else did, for telling me the truth even when I didn't want to hear it, For being exactly what I needed. Mrs. Halloway's eyes went suspiciously bright. Don't get sentimental on me now. I have a reputation to maintain. Too late. I'm already sentimental.
They stood there a moment longer, two women who'd built something remarkable together, watching the sun rise over the estates that had become their legacy. Then Mrs. Halloway cleared her throat.
Come on. We have work to do. We always have work to do. Exactly. So let's get to it. They walked back toward the house together. Behind them, the boundary markers stood solid and permanent, no longer symbols of conflict, but of something earned, something built, something that would last. 5 years later, Philippa's book was being taught at agricultural colleges across England. The consulting firm had expanded to include 20 women, all trained in the methods she'd pioneered. Estates that adopted their strategies saw consistent profit increases and higher tenant satisfaction. The old guard still grumbled. Lady Marchmont still disapproved. But their objections had become background noise, easily ignored, because the results spoke for themselves. On a warm June afternoon, Philippa and Edward stood in the Thornfield Gardens, watching their daughter, 3 years old, stubborn as hell, absolutely fearless, chase butterflies across the lawn. She's going to be trouble, Edward said. She's going to be extraordinary, Philippa corrected. Same thing. Exactly. Their daughter tripped, fell, got up without crying, and kept running. She gets that from you, Edward said. The stubbornness or the resilience? Both, us. Philippa leaned against him, watched their daughter play, and felt something settle in her chest. Not peace exactly. She was too driven for peace. But satisfaction, contentment, the sense that she'd built something worth building. Do you ever think about that first meeting? Edward asked. In my study? Sometimes, usually when I need to remind myself how far we've come. I was such an ass. You were. But you got better. Only because you refused to accept anything less. She smiled. Someone had to have standards. Their daughter ran over, grabbed Philippa's hand. Mama, come see. See what? Everything. Philippa let herself be pulled across the lawn, Edward following, both of them laughing. And somewhere in the house behind them, on a shelf in the study, sat the boundary survey from 2 years ago. The one that had started everything, a reminder of where they'd begun, a symbol of how far they'd come. The world hadn't changed overnight. The old prejudices still existed. Women still faced barriers that men never considered. But Philippa had proven something essential, that competence couldn't be denied, that character mattered more than birth, and that the harshest environments didn't just test you, they revealed who you actually were. She'd walked into a Duke's study as a transaction and walked out determined to prove her worth. She'd bought an estate as an act of defiance and turned it into a masterpiece. She'd faced down a system designed to dismiss her and forced it to acknowledge her on her own terms. And in doing so, she'd opened doors for others, shown that a different path was possible, that you could refuse their rules and write your own. The sun moved across the Thornfield Gardens. Their daughter's laughter echoed across the lawn. Edward's hand found hers. And Philippa Vane, no, the Duchess of Harwell, though she still thought of herself as Philippa first, stood in the life she'd built and knew, with absolute certainty, that every battle had been worth fighting. Not because she'd won, but because she'd refused to surrender who she was in the process. And that, in the end, was the only victory that mattered.